Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Oak Performance Radio. I'm your host, Adam Lane. If you're new to the show, our goal here is to create some fantastic content for athletes, parents, and coaches. We tell stories, have laughs, and go into everything that is the end game of athletic performance, helping athletes achieve their optimal performance and be the best they can possibly be. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Oak Performance Radio. I'm your host, Adam Lane. With me today, from beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Mr. David Gil of VERT Training Systems. David, thanks for joining us.
Great to be on.
Holy cow. This is, I don't know all the things that you've done in your life, but I want you to know this might be the pinnacle right here. It could be all downhill from here. I'm just warning you. You've achieved in life. David, for the tens of people that listen to the show who might not know who you are and why you're such a big deal, tell the people who you are and why you're such a big deal.
So I'm David Gil. I'm the Performance Lab Director and Head of Sports Science for a little company called VERT. My background's exercise science, physiology, and I have the honor and pleasure of being part of an organization that was not originally supposed to be a volleyball company, but we're a wearable technology platform. And what I do is I help with product development. And the main thing that you and I are going to talk about is I help with education. So really the crux of what I do is trying to educate parents, coaches, and players to keep their athletes from suffering essentially what I suffered, as many athletes did. 15-year-old blowing out both of his shoulders from overtraining and ending his athletic career, essentially. I've been doing this with VERT specifically for about 8 years. I guess this is the part where I brag about myself a little bit. I work with over 500 collegiate teams, about a dozen national programs. I consult with a lot of them, the majority of that being load management. So we have, I won't say invented because we didn't, but we were the first to make load management a thing in the sport of volleyball, to teach coaches, primarily coaches and players, how it is you can plan your practices to ensure the lowest risk of injury and therefore the highest rate of performance. It's a very, very broad oversimplification of the, over 10 years the company's been around and 8 years that I've been kind of running that division. And then I know what you and I have talked about, and we'll get into today, Adam, is on the flip side, the main goal, my main goal personally, is youth. Because if we get the youth to move well, then by the time someone like me is tracking them when they're older, we can focus more on the sport and less on trying to keep them playing it.
So I love everything that you said there. The primary listener, consumer of this podcast is our parents and our athletes, and some of our coaches of different realms, of different sport coaches and things. So I think this is absolutely perfect because it is always frustrating for a coach. And I started coaching in 2002, and it's been a while, and you see different coaches handle and different athletes handle, parents handle injuries differently. Often it's this, oh shucks, gee whiz, that's bad luck. Oh, bummer. Didn't see that coming. Oh, maybe next year. And there is bad luck. Sometimes you get, in your more, football, somebody can plant their foot in the ground and somebody come through their knee and there's nothing you could have done about it. Like there's no technology. There's no any, like it happens and stuff like that. And other sports similarly. However, you guys, I want you to explain the tech a little bit just so people can wrap their heads around it. And then I wouldn't mind going down rabbit holes, but you guys try to get out in front of this and try to be very preventative with this load management. So we could still get better at sport. We could still practice. We could still play. We could still compete, but we could do it intelligently. So we could do it over the long haul, because at the end of the day, doing it day after day, week after week, year after year, that's what turns into this long-term athletic development.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, especially if people are listening to this, then either themselves or their athletes they're serious, right? They want to play that sport at the highest level. And I always start off by saying, and this isn't just about volleyball, any sport at the highest level to an extent is not healthy mechanically in your body, right? In volleyball, and this, obviously this is not a reason not to do sports, right? We love sports. In volleyball though, volleyball's not good on your knees, period. Right? When people think of jumping sports, two come to mind, volleyball and basketball. And there's absolutely no comparison between the two. Volleyball is a jumping sport. Basketball is a sport that happens to have some jumping. Okay, like in an NBA game, a guy might jump 30 to 40 times, and 3 of those are above 80% of their max. A middle blocker can jump 160 times in a 5-set match with 128 of those above 80% of their max. So, it's totally different. But I digress a little. We have how we got into this is with this little thing, looks like a thumb drive. It goes around the waist of the athlete, roughly under their belly button. And it was the first sensor that was clinically validated to count and measure jumps. So measure jump height and count the jumps. And that's how it started. And what's funny is it was originally, the founders thought it would be this broadcast basketball product to show off someone dunking. And before the product came to market, someone told them to go to the AVCA convention. For those listening, AVCA convention, American Volleyball Coaches Association convention. Again, our founders at that time didn't even know what that was. So they go to this thing and all these coaches come up and they're like, oh, it's cool that I can measure jump height. Can it count? They're like, well, yeah, we have to know it's a jump so we can put a counter on there. I mean, totally changed the trajectory of the company completely. Because at that time, Coach Cry with the national team had like 3 managers trying to hand count, like 1, 2, 3, and it just disaster. Like that's too much going on. So when they found out there's a technology coming out that could count jumps, people went nuts, right? You have the Mary Wise, the John Dunning of Stanford, Russ Rose of Penn, like all the biggest names were like, great, this is it. So they started doing it. We had Coach Todd Dagenet, formerly of UCF, now at the Atlanta Vibe. He was also one of the first, and it was really fascinating because all on their own, they kind of came to this number between 100 and 120 jumps. That was just based on sort of average game demand. And then we had a lot of other programs that would get this, and you have all this information now, like all this information. And they had no idea what to do with it. Like none. All right, cool. We jumped 80 times today. Is that a lot? Is that a little? And so I got brought in essentially to bring nuance to the data, right? Figure out how many jumps is too much, how many jumps is too little. And then as the technology developed, the other main metric that you and I will talk a lot about and had talked a lot about was even though all these wearables track a million different things, you get like a million data points, but it's crazy overwhelming if you look at all the information. For young athletes, young coaches, jump count, jump height, and landing impact, how hard an athlete lands. So those are the 3 main things we look at to help determine if they're fatiguing and mainly to help plan, because there should be days where there are low days and high days. Maybe even medium days. Some people believe in only low and high days. It's a whole other conversation. But yeah, we do that, again, primarily at the collegiate level. We have programs that my team literally scripts every single practice. Not what they're doing, but how much. Because in the end, what every coach at every level should be looking for is a balance between developing the skill, and that's the coach, the swing, the positioning, the platform, and the physiological load, developing the physical. That's where the other set of eyes, because a coach can't be sitting there counting their jumps while they do it and, looking at all the other things. They're trying to coach. So that's why we exist, essentially, to answer those questions.
it's interesting from a strength conditioning standpoint to think our most basic program that we start athletes with. This is like your like middle schoolish type program. This is very boring, or even like freshman in high school, very boring linear progression. Hey, we're gonna start you back squatting here, and we're gonna do 3 sets of 5, and next week we're gonna do the same thing, except we're gonna add 2.5 pounds, and we're gonna do the same thing. And it might be boring, it might be easy, but we're going to continue with this low linear progression. And over time, you're going to get better and better and better and better. What is basically never tracked is the jump piece, because we'll have plyometric within training and stuff like that. And our stuff is always very, very low volume and obviously not a big deal. However, when you take it to the sport, we're not measuring that at all. There's no, we're not looking at, how many times you're jumping, how, the impacts of some of those jumps, the stiff lands, the landings where you get out of position and just don't land like a cat. And we want you to land like a cat. And so it's interesting to me, because it's, obviously, I don't know. I absolutely love that, because you wanted, and you nailed this, you want to develop the athletic skill along with the actual sports skill. And I think that gets lost, because like, I'm pretty decent in the weight room. I'd be a terrible volleyball player. My skill is not there. But you take somebody, and you see this too. Like we have, coaching kids for the last 20 years, and coaching kids specifically with volleyball in the last 8 here, you see those kids who are dedicated to the gym. They love the gym. They love playing. They love pepper, but they're not the athlete. They don't like spending time, in the weight room, getting stronger, doing that piece. They've cut those corners, and they've gotten good at volleyball, but they play down here. They don't play up here because they haven't developed, they haven't wanted to, or whatever it might be. In the way of keeping athletes, I know this is a new hot thing, this long-term athletic development, that people are, this European model, which I don't think is rocket science at all. Like, this is, I think this should be common sense. We want athletes, and this is what I want for my kids. My 12-year-old's going to be in 7th grade. He plays some soccer. He wants to try football this year. Wrestling's probably his best sport. I don't truly care what he does. I just want him to enjoy it over these next 6 years. And if he wants to go into college, hey, hot dog. And if he stops playing because he wants to stop playing, that's fine too. But like, I don't want it to be because he got burnout. I don't want it to be because he got massively hurt and now he can't come back from it. I want him to, sports are fun. Sports are enjoyable. I want him to really, really enjoy these next 6 years. In the way of looking at VERT, in the way of, because we share some athletes, the Eastern Illinois kids and stuff like that. Like in the way of what, if I'm a coach or I'm a parent or I'm an athlete, I'm anybody. And, and what is the data telling? What is VERT telling, people that they might not be thinking of? I just 14 different directions there. Holy cow, that was
no. I know where I'm going to go with it, because I have to start. The Eastern Illinois is a really intriguing story, because they had the system, and as I mentioned, there are some programs that my staff will actually program for them, and there's also a connection there. There's other people in Eastern Illinois who know me, and they're. And coaches talk. And in volleyball, what I love about volleyball is I have coaches on video, collegiate coaches on video, saying, I use VERT for this, and it's been a competitive advantage. And they're sharing it with the rest of volleyball the way they use it, because it's healthier and helps the athletes. I work in other sports. Other sports don't do that nearly as much. So I've fallen in love with volleyball. But Eastern Illinois, I remember they called, and they said, you know what? We got some big time players this year. We haven't won a conference in forever, and we got approval to go with your advanced platform. And to be blunt, it's kind of humbling. You're like, we're going to give you this, David. We want you to you're going to totally tell us what to do. We're going to follow it. Now, I'm not saying that's why they went on to dominate and win. However, they did, which is really fun. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I just had a call with their entire team. Coach Thomas said, I want the whole team to sit down on a video call and you explain how we work in partnership. Literally explaining the balance between the skill and physical. But in the end, the proof's in the pudding, because by the end of the season, they freaking wrecked their competition. And some of those games were a little different at the beginning of the season. However, they were primed and ready to go. So I'll back off from that a little bit. But when you're looking at, keeping an athlete healthy, I never just talk about what VERT does, right? I always like, especially if you're talking to a lot of parents and athletes, the first thing I look at, frankly, is actually just warm up, right? Like I'll go to a lot of clubs, and I'll see some clubs, walk over, they do a couple things and they get right into practice. Other clubs, they're doing the right kind of warm up, but the kids are kind of on their own doing it 30% correctly. Yeah. So I like to say, to especially for parents who are listening, a fairly basic, consistent, properly executed warm up. There are plenty of studies that show literally a 40 to 70% decrease of rate of injury because you do a proper warm up. As far as we're concerned, and I did the talk at ABCA last year specifically on landings. And this is how I open it. I tell the coaches, I say, hey, you're sitting there, one, maybe two coaches. And if you're at the club level, you've got, 10 to 15 kids on the court. Maybe you're a high school coach, you've got 22 kids there, and you're trying to teach them volleyball, and the athlete serves, and you're watching the ball, you're watching the receive. How was the setter in position? Was it a 1, 2, 3, ranking, if you're rating it that way? How did the set go? Oh, she came up, she attacked. When in the world are you stopping to look at how they land? Nothing. It's not on the coach. It's like, what? Like in that day-to-day, when you're just watching the sport, like anyone listening, when you watch volleyball, how often do you look at how they land? There's something sexy about that. Like, wow, what a landing. It's what a jump, what a kill, what a dig. Right? Maybe what a set, what a serve. It's never what a landing. But the highest impact thing that we do in this sport is landing. Right? And I always try to make it really clear, if you're ever talking about vertical, I know the arrow on our V points up, but frankly, I wish this one pointed down. I might even change our logo because that you can't have one without the other, right? So that's why when I'm looking at especially the youth market, or well, actually, we'll talk about it really quickly, the collegiate market. Collegiate, again, it's amazing how many times athletes get in and they really don't know how to land properly. I've had Power 5 programs say, we'll get this if you can teach our kids how to land, which is pretty amazing. And you kind of already alluded to it. There's a lot that goes into that, which we can talk about. But getting the data, not only does it, it mean the coach doesn't really have to watch that all the time. We're watching it for them, which I really love. And because it's real time, they can then work on the athletes. So to go back to the point of, hey, it's hard to look at those things. Even though it's hard to look at those things, there has to be dedicated time to do so. Has to be. Last time I was at ABC, I was having a conversation with a club coach of mine. And he's like, oh, I'm going to go see your talk. It's really exciting that you're going to be those very detailed about landings. Not just, hey, people land bad. Here's what you need to do about it. And here's what you can do about it with no one else to help you. But he asked me a really pointed question, which I love. And he goes, okay, so you track all these college athletes. A lot of them don't know how to land coming out of club. Whose fault is that? I was like, that's a great question. And I looked him dead in the eye, and I said, yours. And he wasn't arguing, but he's like, because we're doing all this stuff. I go, yes. But in the end, when you have middle school and high school athletes, they can only be such stewards of their own body, right? They're growing, they're developing. The coach, you can't just be about developing volleyball without developing that which is required to play at the highest level. So you have to take time, because it is not rocket science. Yes, you have certain players who has a shorter Achilles, so she has no dorsiflexion. And that's, the angle of the shin and the foot go in, right? Plantar flexion go out. You have those situations, but those are minor. So let's not focus on the one kid you can't figure out because they have some kind of anatomical limitation. In the end, there are basic tenets that you can use to teach your athletes to land better. And if you get them landing 20% better than what they were before, cumulatively, that's freaking massive. Massive. So we look at those landings in two different ways. Again, the system will show you, it's basically landing stiffness, like how well they're absorbing. And you'll know in like 2 sessions who are hard landers. Like it's all, we have 7 years of normative data. And it sometimes scares coaches, because we'll just look at the data and I'll say, her, and her. They have any hip or back problems? And almost always you're like, yes. It's like, we don't believe in injury prediction. However, landing impact in volleyball is pretty close. I always say you could have someone smoke for 6 months and get cancer, or someone live to be 99 years old. You never know. However, it's a really good indicator. So we track that. And then over time, virtually every athlete, as they fatigue, we've all heard that as you fatigue, your injury risk is higher. Right? Everyone kind of knows that. They don't all know exactly why, though. But in volleyball, any sport, as an athlete fatigues, when they land, they're to varying degrees going to land stiffer. And the reason there is that they want to take pressure off the kind of muscular structure. And to do that, they subconsciously minimize their flexion and put on the skeletal structure. It's like anytime, Adam, you're having kids do squat jumps. If you don't cue them on their last rep, they will land, because they're fried, completely straight-legged. Every time. Right? Anyone? Yeah. And to a lesser extent, that happens on the court. And then you throw in the chaos of the net and all that stuff. So we also trend the data. So we can say like, hey, this person was at like an 8% hard impact landings, which by the way is still good. Anything below 20 is ideal. But now they're at 14%. Why? Like, why is that? What's going on? So then we can make changes. So, all right, we're going to actually have her jump about 20% less this week and see if that landing improves. And oftentimes it does. They just needed a little more recovery. And we cannot quantify the injuries that didn't happen, unfortunately. Because if we could, sure, you were going to say, but if we could quantify that, and I make this joke, not jokingly, if we could quantify that, this would be mandated everywhere. So I hope that kind of answers the main portion of that question in terms of how that data is essentially used.
No, I love it in the sense of, if you compare it to other sports, like there's so many times where coaches can't see what's going under the hood. Like you said, oh my God, this is a great swing, nicely done. You didn't look at the landing at all. Okay. I think you see the same thing. Oh my gosh, that was an amazing tackle, but it was hard with the angle to see exactly, how hard the head hit, in that tackle. It looked good. The guy, you brought him off his feet, put him on his back. That's great. And you did it once, but if you do that 20 more times, 40 more times, 100 more times in a very short span, lots of practice, lots of games, whatever it might be. Now, other things pop up. We have neck issues. We have concussion issues. We have who knows issues. I think you can connect it to gosh darn near any sport. I think specifically basketball, volleyball, and obviously more volleyball because of, hey, there's so much jumping. there's just so much jumping to be able to have this little cheat code in the way of, hey, this is going to tell us if what we're doing is enough or too much, and if we're doing it well or not well. And the fatigue thing is very interesting. I thought about it, but not to that point. And that totally makes sense. Like as kids get tired, they get to the end of practice I mean, heck, and if you if you rewind here, the way any team, I think in any sport, football 2-a-days back in the day, did you start off with a little bit of volume and slowly ramp up? No, they beat the tar out of you for the first 2 weeks of doubles, or again, fill in whatever sport, or basketball, or hey, we're running, we're doing 3-hour practices, and we're doing suicides. We're gonna bring you up because we got to get you in shape, and let's get rolling here. And then at the end of practice, what are you doing? You're doing something competitive, something scrimmage, something where you're going 110%, where you're probably the most fatigued. Now, the coaching argument is, well, we need them to be in shape for the game. So when they, when it makes it happen and there are some interesting things with that that might not be ideal for the kids' long-term health, or even short-term health, or health, just health overall.
I mean, the research at this point is pretty darn definitive. Okay. And it's across sports, like you said, it's across sports. There's a guy named Dr. Tim Gabbett. He came up with the kind of acute to chronic workload ratios, which we'll talk about. I know it sounds super complicated. Again, not rocket science. But the thing is, when we're talking about load monitoring, that's what we're kind of going over, that periodization. Right, that's kind of our main emphasis. And what I always like people to take away from that is, I use the same analogy every time. It's like cooking a steak. If you burn it to start off with, you're in trouble. If you undercook it, you can always send it back to get a little more. And more research, and whatever, this will be for maybe some of the more technically minded listeners, but the reason for volleyball, I would argue, it's almost that much more important to start lower, is volleyball is one of the higher rates of tendinopathy, like tendon issues, shoulder and knee. And a primary reason of that is, like you said, you guys are doing plyometrics, you're doing low-level plyometrics. The reason we don't do a ton of plyometrics is plyometrics has been shown to be they're phenomenal at getting you like faster and stronger, right? They're phenomenal at making you jump higher. It's one of the best things you can do. It's also, unlike lifting, one of the things that develops the muscle at a faster rate than the tendon. And so when people are sitting here thinking like, I'm just going to plyo my face off or jump a lot, what you're doing there is your muscle is going to develop at a really fast rate. So at first you're like, this is great, I'm flying, I'm sore, but I'm good, my muscle recovered, let's rock and roll. But now that rapid fire of the muscle when you jump and mainly when you land, that tendon is now getting pulled and it has not developed the capacity to handle that. It develops at a slower rate. So I always like to be very clear whenever I explain this to a coach or anyone, because they never think of it this way. Everyone thinks of tendons only when they think of injury, right? Obviously, people outside of the training world. The tendon, though, plays a massive role in jumping. It's what's kind of storing and releasing that energy into the muscle. It's giving you a lot of that elasticity. So let's start there, because again, that's jumping sexier than landing, right? So if we want to make sure it can do that properly, we need to make sure that the capacity is in line with that muscle. In order to do that, you have to grow them slowly. And you can talk percentages. Some people say don't grow more than 5% week over week. Most people say don't go more than 20%, right? Because then you have this disjointed growth rates between muscles and tendons and cardiovascular development, all this other stuff. So that's why starting low is so important. And this has been, I'm not saying not been, it was. It's no longer a challenge anymore. It was the biggest challenge for us because at the collegiate level, like you said, 2-a-days, et cetera, the overwhelming majority of volleyball programs only jump once in 2-a-days now. Didn't used to be the case. There are programs that would start with their middles the first week of preseason. But go. Yeah.
When you say that they only jump once, is that people who use VERT and people not using VERT, or are there still?
No, it's both.
Okay, this is well understood within the collegiate. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I can proudly say because of coaches who use VERT. Yeah, right. I can't say everyone's doing this, but it's become, when you have the Mary Wises come out and say, like, yeah, this is what we do, and we're healthier as a result. People listen. When coach comes out and says these things, people listen. We're just a tool that gives them the information, right? And now we also educate. But so yeah, jumping once. Some of the same programs. In fact, I did another presentation a couple years ago on this topic with Xavier University and James Madison University, and Lauren Steinbrecher, James Madison. They're a non-Power 5 powerhouse. I mean, they make the tournament. They're amazing. And I remember Lauren got up there and she goes, it's funny when I look at my numbers now, because she had VERT before we all started getting a lot more into it. And she goes, and it's not just her. There are many coaches that would start the season with their kids at 200 to 300 jumps in a practice. Like started there. She starts at 75 now. I mean, think about that. And the fact of the matter is, we won't get into NCAA stuff. Like, they don't have enough time to prepare, like physically, for the load. Like, you want 5 to 8 weeks. They're not given that like football or basketball is given. Again, another topic. So to your point, it's like, we need to get in there. We need to go. We got a game in 2 weeks. We need to be ready. So one of the harder conversations that we have with coaches is we say, hey, coach, if you're physically ready for your first game, I'm talking collegiately, we probably did something wrong. We went too fast to start. And what's going to end up happening is mid-season, it's going to come back to bite us in the butt. That's literally why probably 50% of our clients end up calling, like, hey, we crashed again. We crash every year. So-and-so said we need to call. Or we had 3 ACLs this year. So-and-so said we need to call. And that's the other funny part. It's like, yeah, you're going to spend a few grand on something like this. And you're going to spend $30,000 on the average ACL repair per. So, yeah. But that's why building the same, very similar to how you build in the weight room, you need to slowly build into your progression so that that tendon can keep up with the muscle until you find kind of a zone where you're good. But even when you're there, you need to, that term we've talked about is undulate, right? You can't have adaptation without undulations, they say. And in layman's terms, you can't get better if you don't kind of fatigue the system and recover. But there's still a level at which we want to fatigue, and even a level at which we want to recover. So, but yeah, that's the acute to chronic stuff, which we can get into whenever you'd like.
I scream to the kids the Goldilocks principle. Like, hey guys, why don't we practice for 5 minutes? Why don't we strength train for 5 minutes? Well, it's not enough. Yes, correct. Good job. You're smart. Why don't we strength train for 4 hours? It's too much. Yes, hey, we're here. Okay, so we find this like nice middle ground where we beat you up, but you can recover and you end up on the backside, happy, healthier, stronger, and it be good. I absolutely, now all of a sudden, if you look at that from a season standpoint, from a 12-month standpoint, as opposed, hey, we're going to build you up, load you up, bring you down, load you up, bring you down. It is crazy that within a few weeks, you have to be ready, collegiately to play these, 5-set matches. High school club-wise, here, we just play 3. Wisconsin, they play 5, but, Illinois, they just play 3. But you're playing the same game, expect to do the same thing on match 1 as you are in the last match of the year. So it's the same, it's the same requirement. You have to give the same effort. It's the same number of jumps, same everything. I remember back when I coached cross country, they would, and I don't know who came up with this. A lot of the early season races would be shorter. So instead of, our varsity running 3-mile races, they'd be running 2-mile races. Our JV, instead of running, 2.2 to 2.5, they'd be running, 1.5 or, whatever would be 3K or something like that. Just to start a little lower, just to get things. I don't know if it made things easier on them or whatever it might be, but I really like that idea. And the way, hey, let's build a little base here and let's take our time, because the state meet is really what we're prepping for. Like That's the goal. I don't care about this random Saturday meet, at Naperville North. Like it doesn't matter. Now, team sports, volleyball sport, basketball, that first game is important. Those conference games are important. So, oh man,
we have time. So that's the thing, and it depends. And this is obviously in general, like with the programs that we script for the most part, we're up front. We're like, all right, we're getting ready for conference play. So by conference game 1, we're going to be ready. But at the same time, what coaches, players, and parents need to understand is you can't peak every weekend. So we always tell our coaches, I say, circle 3. Give me 3 games that, spread out. What are the most important games for you for whatever freaking reason? And we're going to work backwards from that. And that's the thing, because you have to make it clear. You cannot be playing at the top. Not saying you can't win. We've had plenty of clients go like 20 wins in a row. But in the end, and again, for some teams, for their, I think it's called their RPI, they need to dominate their non-conference games. Cool. But you can't track what they're doing over the summer. We're actually assisting though, because the kids are now using, we talked about one of your former players. She's probably using VERT over the summer on her own. Coaches don't look at data. And she has just ranges she can work in to say, all right, so if I'm going to jump, I'm going to start developing a little bit. So maybe I'm more ready. And when I come to practice, start the season, we're going to start a little higher than we did last year. But it's on me as the athlete. I'm the one who needs to make sure I'm ready so that we can crush it. Otherwise, the best thing to do as a coach is you have to assume they haven't done anything. That's the safest thing.
Well, it's funny too, because I could see kids going, we see our high school kids doing this, going into their high school season. They'll go, I guess there are 3 options, but they typically go one of 2 ways. Some kids won't take a day off and they will train like mad people, through, with the sport, with the lifting, with the whole thing. Like I love good breaks. You need breaks. I understand that. They won't take those. They will just hammer hard. And then halfway through the season, they burn out and blah, blah, blah. Or you have kids that they don't do squat and they come into the season, under. And again, going back to Goldilocks here, we're looking for, hey, just hit these numbers. Look, this is where we want you to be. Not too much, not too little. We know in the future you're going to be doing more. So we're trying to build that base and trying to be smart and healthy about it. I love the idea that the kids can take this with them and track themselves and really like look in the mirror and be like, oh, I am doing well, or I'm not doing well, or my landings are poor, or man, I was at 14% yesterday and now I'm at 22%. What the heck is going on? Oh, I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning doing nothing. And now I'm exhausted and, my recovery's garbage. And,
Adam, that reminds me of this is one of my favorites. And I know it's a, tiny sample size, but it was hilarious. There's a collegiate player. We tracked her for like 3 or 4 years. She was like a 0 to 2%. I mean, she landed like a cat. I mean, always. And then I was looking at data and she's at 8% one day, which again isn't high, but for her, I was like, all right, just going to note it. The next day she dropped back down. No big deal. A few days later, 12% dropped back down. And I kept seeing this happen. And so I called for a meeting with the staff, and they even had the academic advisor on there. And because they were like, we don't know what's going on. And I asked the academic advisor, I go, hey, so this day, and this day, like she's landing way harder. He starts kind of laughing. He goes, so every day you just pointed out, she just started a 3.5-hour lab on those days. I was like, wow. And she started, for the first time ever, developing some knee pain. And it was literally the physical manifestation of mental fatigue. Like people don't, and it's not always that clear, but people don't recognize the insane amount of variables that go into an athlete's day-to-day physical performance. But the most important thing is we did something about it. It's always based on percentages. And on those days, we cut her down by between 15 and 20%. We just cut her volume down. Said, you're going to be fatigued. You're still going to come to train, but you're going to train less than your position. She got through the season just fine. Didn't miss a game. Knee pain, is there, but manageable. And the other thing that other story I think is really funny is when you have that old school contingent. You're more than familiar with it. Still some less and less parents, but still some parents and coaches just old school. Like, let's work. I'll never forget. I
almost killed myself. You should almost kill yourself too. Let's do this.
I literally broke myself. Follow my example because I worked harder than everyone else incorrectly. I was at a tournament, walking around my VERT gear, and I think he was like a ref / coach, and he sees me, he goes, "Oh, VERT." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "You're the jump count people. You're making people afraid of jumps. Next thing you know, they can take jumping out of volleyball." And I go, "Yes, like pitch counts remove pitching from baseball." And he kind of stopped talking there. I'm like, it's a two-way street. There are programs. This happens every so often now. Never used to, but now there are programs where I look at the data and I tell them, you need to jump more. You're going too far the other way. And I'll go into now, I think that Goldilocks zone, because I think to someone just listening, it's like, all right, so what's this? How do you determine the zone? And so there's this concept, and it's challenging at club. It's very challenging in club because of the way the schedule works. Practice 2, maybe 3 days, then you go to a tournament and have like 1,000 games. But at the high school and collegiate level, at least, and we can do it with clubs, just again, it's not going to be as pointed and not going to be as directed, is the idea, acute chronic workload. What that means is acute load. That's what I'm doing now, this week. We'll just say it's a week because it's a 7 to 28 day ratio. My chronic load is what have I done? So the most common question I get from a coach, right? And you've probably thought the same thing. It's like, all right, David, so what's a high day for a middle blocker? Like, what's a high day in practice for a middle blocker? I cannot answer that question if I don't know what she's done. I can give you normative values till the cows come home. I always use that number, like at the collegiate level, in a 5-set match, a middle blocker will virtually never break 160 jumps. I talk about working backwards. All right, so we need to have her ready to handle 160 jumps. Cool, we have our physical goal. That's actually a lot easier than the skill goal. We just have the physical goal. So now we just have to follow the plan. So how do we create the plan? If I don't know what you've done, I can't tell you what you should do. And the way acute chronic workloads work is, and again, I'm going to generalize this a little bit, but let's say for the last 30 days, we've jumped 100 times every day. As we discussed, not ideal, right? But easy math. And then this week, we want to keep it the same. So we're going to jump 100 times. So that week into those 30 days, 100 to 100, we're at a 1.0. No recovery, no adaptation, we're at a 1. Cool. We're probably not getting that much better physically. We're just there. If we're building capacity, so when you start the season, even if you start at 75 jumps, we're going to increase roughly 10% week over week, whatever your on-ramp is. So that means if we jumped 100 times, we're going to jump 110 this week on average. So now we're at a 1.1. Or we need to speed it up. We're going to go to 120. We're at a 1.2. You want to stay, like, you don't want to cross that 1.3 threshold. That means we've built too fast. And equally important, the likelihood of injury is almost increased the same if you go above or you decondition and drop below. Right? And that's one of the things that, we probably saw a little bit with the Spurs when they first brought load monitoring. Because I remember watching that back in the day and people were complaining. I think they took too much time off because they still had some injuries. So that's that Goldilocks zone. It's between a 0.8 and 1.2 or 1.3, depending on who you ask. And it doesn't mean that you can't go above it. Like, you may have a crazy match and you're in the red, but that red means let's recover. Let's respond. And there's two things. Always have to say this when I talk about acute chronic workload ratios. There's two ways this concept is abused. Because with anything in sports performance, you have people who are like, I don't use acute chronic, it's dumb, it's flawed, et cetera, et cetera. Everything's flawed, nothing's perfect. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Two things people do wrong. One, they start too high. Like they may start at 200 jumps. You're like, look, I'm in the Goldilocks zone. Why am I having problems? You started at 200 jumps. And two, even though research shows that you can keep building, this goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. At the highest level, no matter what, this is bad for your knees. It's hard on your knees. So it becomes about maintenance. So I've also talked to coaches like, yeah, David, and then frankly, they're proud. They're like, I'm using kids' chronic workload ratios, and they're excited to talk to me about it because I'm a very loud voice in volleyball about this concept, but just having a plan. And they're like, yeah, we've now built them up to where I can get my middles hitting 300 jumps and we're not having any issues. I'm like, cool, but there's only so much cartilage in your knees, period. And I'll tell them, it's like, you're especially certain programs, like kids at your program, like half your team's going to play pro. So I would recommend for the middle, I don't think you ever need to hit that many jumps. I really don't, especially not often. So even though they're staying in the Goldilocks zone, because they were always at like a 1.2 to 1.3, they're always building. They've built. Now the tolerance of that athlete ensure is incredible. But is it necessary? My argument would be no. Certain ones need to have higher because they need to get more rest because their athletes aren't as good. That's another thing. If you've got all the top recruits in the planet, you can get away with less jumps in theory than someone who's got to develop. So that's how you can do the Goldilocks zone. You can do it many different ways. In volleyball, we're lucky we can do it with jump count, and that's unbelievably effective. Or we measure energy. You can even do it with RPEs. Literally asking your kid, 1 to 10, how intense was that day? I know it's subjective, unbelievably effective. Like I've consulted with clubs, like, they can't afford to buy VERT. I'm like, cool, here's an RPE platform. If you're not going to use that, then you're not serious about getting VERT anyway, because that's still unbelievably effective. And it gives you a quantifiable way of saying, like, here's how my team feels. And that's going to dictate what you should do in practice to an extent.
Sorry, my mind went so many different directions there. I think it's interesting, and you brought it up with the girl now taking the 3.5 hour lab. I know when we first got Sparta Science, I had met Jim Steele at a strength conference. He was the head strength and conditioning guy at Penn University for 17 years, something like that. And he was saying how he they scanned, and his line was, he's like, it's like, Adam, I don't know why this tech works. I just do what the plate says, and all I know is my kids don't get hurt. And he's like, the soccer girl chose not to use it, and she had 3 ACLs last year. And then he goes on to tell me this story about he this girl scanned out really nice every single day, similar to your science lab girl. And then one day she was all over the place, and you're like, oh, what the heck's going on? So they scan her again, and it's still all over the place. You're like, what the heck? So you do what we all do. We Control Alt Delete, reset everything. Hey, let's try this again. And she's still all over the place. And kiddo, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Well, it turns out like boyfriend had broken up with her. Stress of finals were like going. She was like some artsy major of something, so she had like all these projects coming due. The rest of the team didn't. It was just that time in the semester that all this stuff was going on, and it's just like she felt like the world was crushing down on her. And to your point, that mental affected the physical. And just I don't know how you want to measure it, but now it's showing, it shows in the physicalness, and that just opens the door for injury stuff, which
you should have seen some of the trends and conversations I had during COVID, right? The kids were finally coming back, and I'd be on with programs, and they say, hey, this is weird. Look at her. And it's funny because we pride ourselves in being able to help. Oftentimes I say, hey, I need you to send me video. Let me look at the video, because the data, I can get a lot of information, but I need some context. And usually we can do a pretty good job. But there, I straight up would tell them, I'd say, no freaking clue. Her grandma's sick. It could be the political unrest. I mean, it could be a billion things. So all we know is she's jumping like 2.5 inches less and landing harder. That's what we know. So what are you going to do about that? Well, you can't ask her certain questions for, again, compliance reasons, things about all those rules. I get them. All right, so let's make sure that we're planning practice appropriately, because we know she's in a risky state. Why, in this extreme example, doesn't entirely matter. We just know that there's a problem. So let's drop her by anywhere from 10 to 20%, see how she feels. And hopefully that's enough because again, this athlete was also complaining of some pain, things like that. And so let's just make sure she's healthy while still training enough to where she's not deconditioning. And again, you can do that with numbers. But the why is, a lot of this data, it leads to more questions. But those questions are what's important, because those questions are what allow you to make better plans. She's landing harder. Why? I don't know. Do you want to figure it out, or so that's, again, during the fall and spring, that's the majority of what I do with teams is helping them understand the why. Why is she landing hard? Or when I watch video explaining why she's not jumping as high as you think she should. I don't coach people on the volleyball side. Right? I'm not sitting here saying you need to run a 5'1", not a 6'2". No. It's just in the mechanics on the things that the volleyball coach in many instances does not have time to focus on, or doesn't even necessarily have the skill set to say, I fully understand the mechanisms and levers for landing. But it's about creating actionable solutions that doesn't require to have someone like you or me there present. And there's so much that can be done.
I think it's neat at the end of the day if you're able to know, because if you don't measure it, if you don't quantify this in some way, shape, or form, I'm a numbers guy. You're a numbers guy. You could easily be under training these athletes. And let's be clear, we're not the Spurs. It's not like there's that type of God-given talent. We're trying to develop. So we're trying to push and do what we can and slowly, again, over the long term, develop this alley. Not too much, not too little, but to actually know the numbers and to know where people are. And if you do it right, if you jump appropriately, if you land appropriately, if you strength train appropriately, if you practice appropriately, if you stay healthy from when you start this sport at the age of 10, 12, whatever it is, play said sport. I don't care what sport we're talking about, to 18, possibly further. And you stay happy, healthy, and strong through this whole process, with some rest times in there and some peak times in there, rest times in there, peak times in there. Like the athlete that you get at the end, that outputs at the end of this, can really be that's my dream for every athlete that comes through this door. I'm not trying to live vicariously through them, but man, if they can eventually, whenever the end comes, high school, college, somewhere, they hang up their shoes. They leave their shoes on the mat. That's the wrestling thing, and they're happy and they walk away, that's my dream for it. And what you guys are doing and just making this so easy. Cause I think that's the coolest thing with everything VERT. Just running into going to the Marquette game, a couple weeks ago and seeing their sports performance guy, just to do it's easy. It's got the kids' names and hey, here are the things. And it's, here are the stiff landings and here are how many jumps and here's the height and just, well, look at that. It's so clear. And then at the end of the day, it just makes sense. And, and now just start to equate it Maddie's been complaining about back problems. Well, no kidding. That's weird. So no kidding. I can't imagine, maybe we need to talk to Maddie and figure some things out. So
and that's why we're and again, a lot of this was during COVID, we stopped doing anything consumer. It was just teams because that was our bread and butter. But we're the team system you saw with Marquette, we're creating an individual version. Yeah, and we're literally in the process of designing that app. We already have obviously the technology. Now it's just making it, because as simple as it appears to you, right? The hardest part of my job, anyone in we'll call it sports science industry, especially on the corporate side. On the academic side, whatever. You can spew big words and numbers, right? Talk about standard deviations and all that jazz, and you're good. I can't do that because my end user needs to use the information, right? I am the translator of those kind of studies, and my engineering team, where we collect over 1 million data points in a single session, and presenting that in a manner that is useful. Like I always say, that the information's only as useful as it is usable, right? So that's been a journey, man. It's been a journey to because when you say to someone like, oh, you're at a 1.1 in your acute chronic workload ratio, the frick does that mean? Okay, you're working hard, like you're building capacity. So it's got to be like red, yellow, green. Landings, it's actually red, yellow, orange, green, but that's just because we have the data to be a little more nuanced about it. And then also creating content. Like now it's also, because that's the next part of it. So we might be able to provide you with the data, the meaning of the data, but I always want to think back to the simplest terms, which is a parent with their athlete, or even just the athlete who does not have access to a coach lane, right? And says, all right, well, I want to learn how to land and jump better. So that's where, create content, partner with people for content so that they can actually do it. And then what we become is not just that platform, but we become the tool to measure if you're doing it well. And I get hugged by coaches. Like I'll go to a tournament and we'd have like a jump station and the kids will jump and I'll say, hey, do you mind? I always ask the parent, do you mind if I give her a couple tips? They always say yes. And I go, put your feet under your hips or swing your arm. Nothing freaking crazy. And they do it. And they went from like a 21.3 to like a 22.8 the next two jumps. Like, oh my God, or 23 inches. I've seen like a 3-inch increase like that just from a tiny little mechanical thing. And the coach is like, I've been trying to get him to do that for like 3 years. I'm like, yeah, it's just they can see it now. Proof is in the pudding. And then I should tell you, I had the highlight, and I mean this genuinely, probably other than this, the highlight of my coaching sports science career was just like a month ago, if that. I was over in Virginia. I was working with James Madison, University of Virginia. And I was at the JMU practice. And when they finished practice, I saw one of the girls come up to one of the younger athletes, puts her hand for a high five. And they looked down at the iPad. And she totally genuinely looked her dead in the eye. She goes, amazing landings today. And I'm sitting there like, yes. And obviously the majority of their high fives are, you killed it, great practice. But this one particular athlete's really been working on her landings. The captain knew it. And she went up and she's like, freaking crushed those landings today. Way to land. Again, that's not sexy, but because that program, we've been working with them for 5 years. A lot of those kids I know, and they've recognized, especially the older ones who've moved on. It's really funny because they'll now call me from their pro teams and say, hey, I really recognize what you guys were doing now because we're not doing that here and I feel like crap. Can you send me a VERT? But that was it, man. That's the goal. That's the goal where the athletes at any level, obviously as they get older, it's easier. They recognize, because we're all invincible until we're not, right? They recognize that, as the saying goes, it's certainly not my saying, but the best ability is availability. And so if you want to be available, I don't care how talented you are or not, if you can't get on the court, who cares? You need to take care of yourself. And there are so many ways to do that. I mean, VERT, obviously, yeah, we're a really good way of doing it, especially in volleyball. But in general, just learning how to warm up, doing RPEs, and just having some kind of a basic plan.
David, I love the whole thing there. I think it's so hard. Again, I'm going from the coach's piece of it, to watch a baseball pitcher throw. I think of Mark Pryor back in the day. A big Cubs fan. I watched him. I went to school at Iowa State, and he came through the Iowa Cubs, so down in Des Moines, and I watched him warm up. And I've never seen a ball leave somebody's hand and hit the catcher's mitt as quickly as that. It was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And then he gets to the pros, and he's amazing, and then just his wheels fall off. And a very lackluster professional career. And it just to be able, and obviously baseball's hard. Like there's so much going on with what's going on. If you could make an elbow vert, that'd be cool. But like there's so many things, and then you don't realize that there's an issue until there's an issue. And so much of the time, with the kids that we deal with, this is the first time they've ever felt pain. They've ever had injury they've ever had, and they don't know what it is. They don't know if it's something that they need to push through or if it's something that they need to back off. And so often, you're I don't want to say your more dedicated athletes will push through, and then they stop once their knee explodes or their back pain is debilitating or whatever it is. You're just like, oh man.
And and look, we've recognized the challenge at that age too. They're growing. Is the thing just because they're growing? But it's not about, the thing is, it's not about stopping. And that's what I always tell programs. Not that rest days aren't important. Rest days are obviously important. But our goal with programs is at the end of the year, they're not taking extra rest days because they have to. That's the goal. So before you get to that point, it's minimizing the load. So if I take that down, if someone's jumping 120 times a day, if I take that down to, let's say, 100 or even 95, then I'll do it that week, see if they're better, and then slowly go up to 105, 110, and then get back to 120. Again, that's the other mistake. You drop down and then you go back up. And the other thing, too, is I'd be remiss if I didn't go over a little bit, because we're sitting here, we're talking about landings and jumping, and I always like to give some kind of concrete examples of, like I said, not rocket science, the things that coaches, athletes, parents should look for on a good landing. Because what we measure is stiffness, right? How hard. I can't tell you if that's on the right leg or the left without video. I can't tell you if they have knee valgus, right? For those who don't know, knee valgus, knees caving in together. It is one of the leading indicators of lower extremity injury. In fact, I think I talked to you offline about this a little bit. HSS, Hospital for Special Surgery in New York. They're like the biggest orthopedic group, I think, in the country, or one of them. I actually love this. They are doing so well there. They put a lot of money into prevention, which is great. And they have a Joe Janowski, he heads up their it's like a mouthful, Pediatric Injury Prevention Institute. And I got them in touch with the AVCA a few years ago, and they've done the largest screening in history of youth athletes, primarily in volleyball. They're doing other sports now too. But when I first started talking to them, they're telling me about the study. I said, what sport are you going to do this in? They're like, we don't know. It's like, I do. How many kids do you want? They're like, we want 100 or 200 kids. I'm like, how about a few thousand? So that's what we've done. They screen thousands of kids. And it's really basic stuff, right? A squat, jump on the box, drop off the box. And they're finding that there's actually a higher rate of valgus, more than 5 degrees of valgus in volleyball players than in other sports. And do you want to even try to guess the percentage? These are ages 12 to 18. What percentage of them had more than 5 degrees of dynamic knee valgus in their assessment of I don't know how many thousand they've tested?
Boys and girls?
Mainly girls. Some boys, but mainly girls. Yeah, no.
12. Yeah. 20.
Wait, keep going. Keep going. Not even freaking close yet.
30.
Keep going.
Oh, this is embarrassing. 40.
Yeah, go ahead and double that.
Really?
Yeah.
80%.
Yeah, 80%.
Goodness.
80%. So when it's a prevalence study, so they're trying to figure out what is the prevalence of dynamic knee valgus. The prevalence is right around 80%. Some clubs are a little lower. Some clubs are actually higher, right? And then the question is why? What can you do about it? So they are also creating content. And so you figure out why do these kids have valgus? We know it's more prevalent in women, so that's why I know when you ask, is it girls or boys? pregnant women, we can talk about Q angle, all that jazz, which leads to it. But when you have that dynamic knee valgus, right, when they're jumping in, and it's mainly when they're landing, like those forces are going much harder into the ACL and meniscus. You're not able to kind of attenuate that ground force through the entire body structure. So, that's one of the things you need to look for, is are the knees caving in? And you can't just say, don't let your knees cave in.
I've tried that cue. Don't do that. You see how you're doing that? Don't do that. Stop doing that. That thing.
In the midst of the volleyball game and all the chaos, it's the same thing with landing. It's like when these girls they're playing volleyball, and you're like, don't let your knees cave. And by the way, only land on 2 feet. Why are you laying on 2 feet? Well, let's look at the video. She's hitting the ball like this. How in the world is she going to land not on her left leg when she's hitting the ball over here? So then it's like, well, where is she approaching from? Where she's heading? All these variables come into play. So that is one of the things that is challenging to fix, because volleyball is a chaos sport, but we still need to prepare them with understanding the basics. And one of the things, and you and I already talked about, one of my favorite things to do is we talked about depth drops, right, off the box. Would you say that's probably the number one thing people do when they start working on landings?
I would say that. That's a fair thing.
Fair thing. Depth drop. Simple, right? Fair. I'm not going to say everyone knows the proper cues. But
there's some common sense cues with that, yeah.
You get the idea. You drop off, you land with 2 feet, try to land quietly. You want to have flexion at the ankles, knees, and hips. Now, if we're doing depth drops, again, you start small, 8 to 12-inch boxes, right? Your kid can only jump 10 inches. Don't have them dropping off 20-inch box. But I did a really fun study. And I had a bunch of athletes set up, and I did the depth drops. And I'm tracking their impact when they land. I see it every time. Boom, 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 boom. And in one instance, this was with a soccer team. It was funny because I had 2 players. And one of them, was landing. It's like a 3.2. We measure acceleration. So we won't get bogged down in how it's all measured, but lower the number, the lower the impact. Right? The better they absorbed it. There's one player's landing at 3.2, 3.4, 3.1, 2.8. The other player always has like multiple impacts. 6.1 with a 2.3. 5.8 with a 2.1. It's like, wow, this is really fascinating. Why is she landing so much harder? Turns out that player was coming back from a knee injury. She had been totally cleared. But when we went back and had her do it again and we watched, her good leg was landing much stiffer and taking all of it. And her bag leg was going, right, that's compensatory injury. That's a little bit granular. The better project was at a number of players and had them drop in there, 3 to 4 Gs. And then I put the box about 2 feet from a wall. Now, they had plenty of space to land exactly the same, and their face would have been like, that far from the wall, dropping off 12-inch box. I want to say about half of them went from like a 4 to a 6 to 8. Because what were they doing? They were now upright. And that's a lot more similar to what it's going to be on the court. So what I always tell coaches, if you're doing depth drops, try to make it as sport specific as you can. Not everything in the gym is going to be sport specific. Of course not. But this is something when working on landings is not only do we have to deal with the chaos of where the heck the ball is, but you've got that net in front of your face. So you need to have a visual stimulus in front of the athletes when they come down and they land. Again, we're creating those kind of motor patterns of, all right, cool, I can do that and still recognize that my face is kind of over or slightly in front of my toes. We're going to have tight net landings, but if I can get that down, it's going to translate a lot better to when they get onto the court. So little things like that, just understanding that when they land, we want some flexion at those 3 points, ankles, knees, hips. If we can get the hips like slightly behind the heels-ish, man, I can't explain to you the difference that makes. It's massive. Matt, you have someone who's landing at like a 22 G, which is stiff. And the second we get their hips back, we get 4 degrees of flexion at the hips, they go from a 22 to like a 9. And when they see that, they're like, oh, yeah. Think about that over the course of a practice, much less a season or your career. So that's the goal. And that's really for the youth. That's what we're really pushing. Not even from a product standpoint, just an educational standpoint. Like, learn these basics. It has to be part of your training. There has to be times when the coach needs to say, hey, we're dedicating these 10 minutes of practice to landing. You could have a day, a time frame. Personally, I always recommend having them train, focus on the landing, then having them train so they can take what they just learned and try to implement it right away. Right? It creates those improved kind of synaptic connections so we can actually learn. But those are the things. If we start doing that with a basic load plan, yeah, you decrease injury rates by like 85% in this country. It would happen, but making it happen is a bit more challenging.
David, I love that. Well, I even know we've gotten, it's funny how one, adapted the last 8 years, but even specifically this year to be able to do the drop stuff, depth drop stuff that we've done. And really that's virtually the only plyo that we do, because often our kids, or basically every day, our kids will train with us and then go right into practice. So the idea of having to do plyometric stuff, which is funny because we've gotten pushback, and really not anymore, but when we initially started, pushback from coaches and parents being like, well, back in my day, we did 1 billion box jumps, and that's how I jumped, got to jump higher, and blah 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 blah. And we don't see they jump at volleyball. Why aren't we jumping more? And you're like, well, they're going to go to practice, and depending, if the other middle is here or not, they might jump 300 times. So let's pump the brakes a little bit. And that piece has been good. But it is interesting how like the adjustments that we've had to make, because we've had kids do, the depth jump like you're talking about, and land and soft and and they'll look beautiful, and then they go on the court and it's like we did nothing. We wasted that time there. So now we're to the point where not only, myself and my staff are we in the weight room, but then we trickle out, and we do this before, but actually like coach them on the court. Because nobody wants me coaching them in anything that looks like volleyball, because that team will not do well. But, to be able to, reinforce what we're trying to do, or during their drill stuff where, hey, this is slower, we're working on some things. Hey, Maddie, let's focus on this a little bit. Hey, checked with Patrick, he's good with it. We're gonna, attack it this way. And I love everything there, David. We're rolling, man. I'm glad you have no hard stop here. You have nothing else to do. What do you wish I would have asked you that I did not?
I was trying to keep it as pointed as possible. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we could go over. As far as just in general for this particular audience around youth and volleyball, man, I think we hit a lot. Behind me over there that's some of the first step research I'm working on. Those are called flower plots, where I can see the angle at which someone's hitting their peak speed out of first step. That's probably another podcast. That's some really cool research. But no, man, I think we hit the majority of it. I really do. I mean, we could continue to delve into this. I could go for probably a couple more hours, but
we'll have to do this again. We'll have
I'm hoping this is enough, and yeah, I'm hoping that this will, especially when we have like the consumer version, it'll be easier, more accessible, so that I want as many people as possible. It kind of feels unfair that certain people can use something that's going to keep them healthy, and others can't. So at least if they have the knowledge to get started, right? Because again, how fortunate is it, patting yourself in the back, that your club has you guys working on the sports performance? That's not every club, right? It's a minority of clubs that have that support. So yeah, no, hopefully people, the listeners learned something today. And obviously if they have any questions, they can reach out to me. Pretty easy. I'm too easy to find.
So how do they find you on the interwebs?
It's myvert.com is the website. And you can schedule calls on many of the pages directly with the Performance Lab. I've got a small team, and think our Instagram's at Vert Club, doing a lot more content now on the social medias. Not something I want to do, but I understand the importance of it. So they literally come in, they're like, David, content time. I'm like, all right. And they just ask me a question. I'll sit there and talk about it. Yeah, those are the best ways to get in contact with us. I like to make it really, really clear. We do plenty of consultations with non-customers. Right? Our board kind of laughs about it. Like, we were just talking to it. It's like, well, someone was interested in, like, yeah, you had a 35-minute call. I'm like, well, their kids come back from ACL injury and they had some questions. So we just kind of talked about things they should do. Like, okay, and it'll come back. So, but yeah, no, we really are, we're about education and these kids freaking playing the best they can by watching the things that kind of the coach can't all the time. So when you put those things together, we're good to go. But yeah, hopefully people are going to find this informative, the millions of listeners.
Millions, tens of millions, or just tens, one of the two. I don't know which one it could be. I mean, by the time this podcast hits, I mean, there's a good chance it might shut down the internet. The whole internet might explode because everyone is racing to it at the same time.
Hey, volleyball is getting bigger, man. Right? It's getting bigger. It's been really fun now working with pros and domestically, because we work with a lot of pros overseas, obviously. Really quick funny story there. I can literally tell you which country I prefer your athlete go play.
That's crazy. Oh, that's interesting.
Like, yes, no, yes. Getting better. We had athletes reach out before and say, I'm being broken. Can you help me? You send them a VERT. We look at their data. I put together reports from to show their coaches and say, hey, she's jumping triples she ever did at University of Florida. She doesn't need this much. That's the challenge, right? And again, it goes back to the beginning. Who's responsible? Now, at that level, you are as the athlete. Like, the coach obviously has responsibility, but it's now the balance is shifted. It's your body, it's your life, it's your career. You're responsible. With the parents and coaches, though, we need to arm them with everything we can to make sure that we're doing the best job we can, not just making them better volleyball players, but resilient volleyball players, resilient athletes across the board.
That's so interesting, because I can't tell I don't know, maybe dozen volleyball players that I know that have gone pro in some way, shape, or form that, we've coached here or whatever. It is interesting to hear some have great experiences, and I went to Italy and I felt amazing. It was so much fun.
One of the best. Italy's one of the best.
There we go. And then others where it's just like, yeah, they just beat the tar out of us. Didn't care about anything. And, and some, are there 1 or 2 years and they're done, and boom, and some stay a little longer. And, yeah, that's it. I can totally believe that you can narrow it down to.
We have more clients in Italy than almost any other country in Europe. They will literally say, hey, they'll call and say, we have this athlete coming to us. They said to call. What should we do? And I'll say, here's what this athlete needs. This is what we did in college. Here's what the numbers. Once I have approval, of course, from the athlete. And they're like, cool, thanks. And they roll. Like they're like, let's not, fix something that's not broken. And there are other countries that are getting into it. Obviously, that's how I know those load numbers, because there are some teams that have it, but it's a process. It's moving quickly. The thing I'm most proud of, genuinely, in my career is the change I have seen in these jump numbers in volleyball at the collegiate, national, and pro level. I mean, it's astonishing. When I go look at the data annually now, and we'll pick all these teams and do an average and just looking at these numbers versus what it used to be, I mean, massively different. And we know we've had an impact. We know that a lot of athletes are healthy because of it. So I'm happy there.
David, that's awesome. But I appreciate your time.
No, thank you. This is a fun conversation.
Yeah. Well, seriously, we'll have to do a part 2 here and just kind of, expand this out. And I don't know, the athletes' health is everything that we do, and everything that I yearn for it. And every time a kid tweaks an ankle, I'm like, oh no. So just to see what you guys are doing and how you're doing it, I really appreciate it. You're doing good work, sir. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Listeners, thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for listening to another episode of Oak Performance Radio. Don't forget to check us out on the social at Oak Performance and online at www.oakstrength.com/Oak Performance. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.